All right, so we're gonna get. All right, we're good here. Hopefully the connection's all right. We're gonna get Eric on the call here. There he is. Look at that first shot today, man.
We're getting good at this.
That's it. It's a couple buttons. Those things get confusing. So, all right, guys. So yeah, we actually were able to log on in like 10 seconds. Usually it takes about 35 minutes for us to get this going. So guys, we're gonna actually Eric, I want to have you kind of kick it off. You're the one who did the post this week, so I'm gonna kind of let you sort of start the conversation. We can you can have a little bit more of a talk about training minimums and checking those boxes before you move on and really trying to make sure that we're just making better decisions through those training minimums. So why don't you go ahead and why don't you lead the talk today, buddy?
I will lead the dance. So so the concept of this is from questions we get at workshops. And someone pulls me to the side and says, hey, I want to go work with the local high school team or the local soccer club. And they say, they have this training program, but I don't think their program is the best. And how do I go in and kind of not, ruffle feathers, but still be able to implement what I want to implement? And I said that the first thing to do is kind of take ego out of it, right? If you come in and say my program's better than your program, that's going to never end well, right? Because it's just going to be a butting heads. But if you say, okay, if we can agree on some minimums that we want to hit, let's work together on making sure we check all those boxes, and then we can argue about what optimums are, right? Because everybody can argue about what's the absolute best way to write a program. We talk about in our course that there really is none, right? You could write 4 programs for the same person based on the same background, and they're all great, right? And they're all going to work. The question is, are we meeting at least the minimum? So there's minimums. If we go through the checklist of, I have my performance pyramid that I took from Gray Cook's performance pyramid and blew it out, and I show 58 elements, and with those elements, they're broken into layers. So the first thing that we check off as far as minimums is health, right? You can get fit without being healthy. It's really hard to get healthy. It's much easier to get fit without being healthy first. So that's a good checklist to say you can't score a goal or shoot a basket or hit a home run from the training room, right? So that's a big checkbox that we got to get. So a minimum, that is, we got to get you at least healthy enough that you can do the things that you need to do. From there, it's now a checklist of things from movement standpoint, and that's what most people know us for, right? Is what we've done with FMS. And so there's certain minimums we want to get there. Like in FMS, we have minimums of, we want to get at least a 2 in all your screens, and ideally no major asymmetries. And obviously if you're getting 2s and everything, there's no pain, right? So that's a minimum there. But then you could break that down even more into a more granular level. But that's kind of this concept, is to say, before you do this, you should at least be able to do this, right? And we can go down a rabbit hole today of a bunch of different applications of that.
Absolutely. So, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that everybody thinks when it comes to, you have to check off this box before you go to the next, is that if you break that rule, you're gonna burst into flames. And context is everything, right? It's we've all heard that term of do not load dysfunction, right? But again, even the idea of loading dysfunction, there's very, very different ways to do that. What if someone's dysfunction is that they're just, when we say dysfunction, that's a very big umbrella, by the way. So we're not just talking about sort of less than optimal movement. If someone we'll use the squat. If someone doesn't squat well, but they have the prerequisite mobility to get into those positions, well, technically, yes, they are not moving well because they can't squat. But at the same time, maybe what we need to do is just give them a little bit of a load. And that is going to help them get a little bit stronger, because maybe one of the reasons why they can't squat is because they're weak, right? So context is everything. So, the idea of it depends, right? Everybody talks about this now in our industry. It's, well, what do you think about this? And we say it depends. Well, if you're going to say it depends, you better have a damn good reason as to why you're saying depends and actually come out with something, right? So, but you have to determine why can't someone get into a position, and then you have to make the best decision as a coach and the environment on what's going to be the most beneficial thing. So the idea of just checking boxes is, honestly, it's just common sense and it's smart, intelligent coaching. You know, it's one of those things, even if you don't think that you have these minimums or these prerequisites, you do, because most people are not going to go right to a back squat. They're just not. They're probably going to do a goblet squat first, right? Or maybe a light body weight squat first, and then maybe a sandbag or a kettlebell squat. And maybe for some individuals, that's the end of their squat journey. They don't need to progress to a bar. But most people have these minimums and have these progressions built in, but maybe they haven't really talked about it in the way that we are.
So sometimes we make some minimums that are somewhat arbitrary, right? And like you said, the context is really important with that. Like you should be able to double body weight squat before we consider doing any kind of jumping. Like that's going to really limit the kind of who you're going to be able to get to jump. And not to mention that I could go to, you know, I could drive 20 minutes in any direction, find 3 city playgrounds where there's kids who are dunking the ball who couldn't squat single body weight, right? So should I tell them to stop, right? And so we kind of lose sight of some of those things. But then there are certain things that we do need to look for. So we look at movement. If you're not going to use the something like the FMS that's a little bit more structured and a little bit more objective, and you just want to look at gross movement, can you touch your toes? Can you extend back? Can you reach behind your head or reach behind you overhead as well as behind? Can you rotate right to left? Can you balance on one leg? Can you get to a full squat? If you could do those things and there's no pain, there's no significant asymmetry, and there's no significant limitation, then at least we have some baseline of movement. Now that's enough movement for just, you know, hey, I want to go out and do some general activity. That's not enough specific movement to say, hey, I want to go throw a baseball 90 miles an hour, I want to go swing a large, you know, long shaft golf club as fast as possible, you know, a couple hundred times a weekend. So, you know, when you ask what is enough, what is the minimum, it's in context to what the activity is and what they're going back out to as well. There are some general things, though, that I kind of want to see that goes, you know, that kind of cross-populates across a lot of different, you know, goals and specificity. So that's when we start looking at like some strength factors. Now, personally, especially since I work with a lot of high school teams, I'm going to one right after this, there are certain minimums I like them to hit from a strength perspective before we start getting a little bit deeper into more complex movements. And so a lot of those I look at in the beginning. If you look at the beginning phases of a lot of my programs with athletes, it's primarily unilateral work. Okay. And we can go down a rabbit hole of unilateral versus bilateral. But in the beginning, I like to start with a lot of unilateral work and then see if there's any gross, discrepancies right to left. But I also have a checklist of numbers that I like to hit. Now, I kind of put this list together from a lot of different people, from people like Joe DeFranco, Dan John, Chad Waterbury, John Rusin has some good stuff on what are some general ideas of numbers you like to hit. And I'll throw some of the ones that I use, and I'd love to hear some of the ones that you use. But like as an example, we look for you to be able to do a single arm floor press with about half your body weight for 8 reps. A single arm overhead press with about 40% of your body weight for 8 reps. We look for you to do a single arm like dumbbell reverse lunge with half your body weight for about 6 reps, right? So you start to have things like that are examples. And then, even baked into some of the testing that we have with when we get into performance, we'll talk about in a little bit, there are certain numbers you want to hit. But like those are some basic numbers that regardless of what sport you play or so forth, those are some goals that I want to be able to hit. Do you have any like certain strength numbers you kind of shoot for?
As far as strength numbers, so, my world's a little different, right? So, I would argue that sort of that double for the fighters that I work with, right? I would say the double body weight deadlift is something that is pretty important. And I don't care what the implement is. I just care that they can get to it. And generally I tend to use with MMA, right? So MMA, most guys will walk around in camp about 15 to 20 pounds heavier than their fight weight. So I use their walk around weight as a number rather than their fight weight, because they're really only at their fight weight for like an hour and then everything else. So if I've got a 135er that walks around and at 155, that's sort of my number. Want them to be able to get to the point of doing a 310 deadlift, right? And that's honestly that's really baseline stuff. Every single one of those individuals is going to get there. Obviously, with men, it's a little bit easier to get to that half body weight. I mean, sorry, double body weight number. But most of my females are pretty damn close as well. So that's one of them. From a weighted pull-up standpoint, you know, I would say pretty much all of my male athletes can at least do, you know, an additional 50 pounds in a neutral grip. That's like a nice number that I like to see all my guys hit. Some guys more than that. I've got a few guys hit 100-pound strict pull-ups and go from there. But
I'm going to press pause on the pull-up thing because that was one of our posts from earlier this week. Is kind of my progression with that as well. Is that, let's say I go in and I have a high school football team, right? And I tell everybody on the chart, on the board, it's going to say 5 chin-ups is one of the stations. Well, for the kid who's the 160-pound defensive back, right? He can crank out 10, like no problem body weight. And then the 300-pound lineman, well, he's never going to get to that, right? So what's my gradient is to kind of differentiate is the first thing you got to be able to do is should be able to do a straight arm hang, right? This is actually one of the tests that you could do as part of the FCS. Straight arm hang you should be able to do for 60 seconds, right? That's palms overhand, thumbs from your shoulder straight up. You should be able to do a straight arm hang for at least 60 seconds, right? If you can't do that, guess what? You're going to keep doing hangs until you can get to 60 seconds. And then once you can get there, now I have you jump up and you're going to do a bent arm hang. So basically palms facing you, get to here. Can you get chest to the bar? Hold that for 30 seconds. If you can get there, now we can start to progress into different chin-up variations. If you can't, you just stay there. And it's not that I don't like you or I don't think chin-ups are good. They're just not, you just haven't earned the right to get there. You have to earn the stripes to get there. And then from there, it's just the art of progression of that. So I cut you off there, but that, you know, the chin-up thing is a very simple thing to say, okay, well, here's simple, easy marks to get. And you know what happens when they get to those marks? That chin-up's a lot easier to teach. They're a lot more successful with it. The other example I gave, or actually I think it's the post today, talking about Olympic lifts and like power cleans, right? And everybody argues, is Olympic lifting good? Is it bad? It's great, but provided you have, you know, the ability to coach it and provided they have the prerequisite competency and capacities. Like, so if you think about a clean, it's a deadlift, it's a high pull, it's a front squat. If you can't do those 3 things separately, you're not going to do them all together really fast under load. So let me check those boxes first. Those would be your minimums. And then now I can start to introduce the clean, right? So that's not saying cleans are good or bad or cleans, it's right or wrong, depending on if this person met these minimums.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to the pull-up conversation, I usually program weighted pull-ups. Once my athlete can get to 10 strict pull-ups, that's when I'll start throwing into weighted variation. It's just, for me, that seems like a pretty good number, and I've had a lot of success with that. And then obviously there's some programming from there. 2 other standards that I use at my gym, and it works quite well, is we teach a lot of kettlebells. And actually with the way that we teach kettlebells, there's a couple things. If we've never seen you swing a bell at our gym, we're not going to let you take our kettlebell classes. And it's just simply because we want to make sure that you're not going to injure yourself. So you have to demonstrate to us in person that you can swing safely and correctly. And if not, you have to take a workshop. And then from there, one of the barriers that we use is if you can deadlift a 32-kilo bell for 5 reps, then we'll ask you to swing after that. And it's really because we want to see if you can hinge correctly. We want to see if you can generate enough tension. And it's only like 70 pounds or so it's nothing crazy. But what it does is it also creates this sort of built-in filter where you're not trying to rush into things that you shouldn't be going into. Because yes, could you swing in a 10-pound kettlebell? Yes, but at that point, swinging a 10-pound kettlebell, you're not going to get any sort of adaptation because it's so damn light. I mean, you probably, you know, have a purse that weighs more than that, or something that you carry around, right? So for us, using that 32-kilo deadlift for 5 reps is a nice way to filter things out. And it also shows that you understand how to create tension, you understand how to hinge, you understand grip, you understand breathing, and then go from there. And then as far as deadlifting goes, we kind of take that same approach. We just go a little bit heavier. We have kettlebells that go up to 60 kilo. So what we focus on is, we're going to do, if you can show me that you can deadlift a 60-kilo kettlebell, then we're going to move you on to probably a trap bar deadlift or some other barbell deadlift, depending on your goals and what you're trying to do. So I think another thing that people don't think about is when you have these sort of built-in filters and these built-in minimums, it also allows you and your team, if you're working at a gym, to be on the same page with the way that you approach strength and the way that you approach teaching, right? So if everybody's sort of headed in the same direction, you're not going to contradict what one another says, right? And I think most people would agree that before you are going to do something fairly advanced, you should check those boxes and have those minimums dialed in first. It's just pretty common sense stuff, but you just have to make sure you understand and you all agree on what that's going to be. Because if I say one thing and someone else says another thing, well, it's not going to work too well, especially if you're in a gym where all of the coaches are actually working as a team and as a group of employees, not independent contractors, because that's a different conversation. But I think what it does is it creates standards not only for the members, but it also creates standards for the coaches, because they understand, wow, there actually is a systematic process to getting people stronger. It's not just guessing and seeing how it goes.
So you talked about kettlebells, as you often like to do. So one of the things we also had in an earlier post is like the get up is kind of one of the holy grails of kettlebell training. And immediately people want to go and learn a get up with a kettlebell in their hand. And things we do as a prerequisite is have you be able to do that thing with a shoe balance on your hand. Like, because if not, it just becomes this seizure-like sit-up and people are just throwing themselves into it. So if you can do it, and I'll start with just a half get up, and if you can do 10 perfect get ups without dropping that shoe on each hand, well, then now we can start that at kettlebell. And then with the full get up, same thing. We go back to the square one, and you got to be able to do it clean all the way up and down with a shoe before we ever add load to it. Now that is the carrot at the end of the stick to say, okay, I'm happy to give you as much of the weight here as possible that you want, but you have to be able to earn that. And so to earn that, you got to show me you have the right control to do that. So that's really all we're doing. And when we talk about training minimums is to say, before you do this, you got to at least show competence in this first, right? Now, I'll shift gears a little bit more into my world and say, okay, well, we have certain testing that we do, and I'll implement facets of the FMS, TPI, FCS, all these things within a performance evaluation day one, right? So I just had a bunch of my college football players came back and they're starting to train for the summer. And with that, some of the testing we do is some jump testing, right? And as a minimum, you should be able to hit at least 120% of your height in a broad jump, right? And so if you can't do that, well, that tells me there's a deficit there, right? And so as opposed to a dysfunction, this is a deficiency. And so you have a deficiency in that. And that tells me, that drives my programming. That tells me you need this. And so we need to program more of this. We need to get something that gets you to get lower body power. Now, that being said, if let's say someone comes in and they blow that away, right? Now you have to start making the decision, do they have enough? That's a little different than a minimum. And so what the minimums will allow us to do is take, like I said, ego out of it and our bias out of it. Kid who I had coming yesterday, he's a stud for a high school kid, definitely going to be a big time college prospect. And he came in and when I asked him what his goal was, he said, I need to get more flexible. I need more mobility. Well, he racked up 2s and 3s on every single mobility test I put him through in the FMS. He had all the mobility everywhere that he needed. What he really lacked was stability, right? But nobody was addressing that. And then he also wanted to work obviously on his speed, but then I looked, and why he wasn't fast was because he wasn't hitting certain marks in certain tests, like that broad jump, right? So if I just gave him a bunch of stretches and a bunch of speed drills based on what he asked for, which is unfortunately what a lot of people will do, I'm probably not going to get him any better. Really, my thing was to see which things does he not at least meet the minimums, and then I can go start to lean into my biases, into my toolbox of what I think is going to be the next best thing to make him optimal. But I got to at least meet the minimums in some of these things. And so like that broad jump is just one example of, you should be able to do at least this, regardless of what you're going to do as your sport. The other one is, and that's just looking at kind of your explosive control. The other side of that coin is your postural control. Like, how well do you hold up under load and kind of self-organize under gravity? And we use the farmer's carry. And you should be able to do at least 75% of your body weight for about 1.5 minutes and 250 feet. And if you're grossly behind that, then, well, okay, we need to definitely put some things in there to build up that capacity and awareness, because if you don't, you're going to break down. You're going to be a one-play wonder. So that's just some of the performance ones that we look at. Now, obviously, you have a huge conditioning factor as well with your fighters. So, what are some of the performance minimums that you look for?
And again, it's tough because in my world, we have so many different athletes, and sometimes we get to a 12-week fight camp. Some weeks we get a 5-week fight camp. So, but there are a few things that I like to check off early in the process. And one of those things is localized muscular endurance. And it's really tough to sort of gauge this, but I always find that with a lot of individuals, it's a limiting factor. And what I mean by that is, when I take someone through some baseline assessments, I always ask them, what do you feel like what went first? Is it, I always say legs or lungs? And usually they'll tell me right away, man, it was my legs. Okay, if it was your legs, maybe you don't have a true cardiovascular endurance issue. Maybe you have a muscular endurance issue, right? Or if they're like, it was the lungs, then it could have been there. But regardless, we need to test and we need to dig a little bit deeper. And so I always try early on to really see where they're at from a muscular endurance standpoint. And we'll do some baseline work with sleds and, how much ground they can cover in X amount of time. But there are two conditioning tests that I use with on the bikes, and we'll share that with you right now. One is a max power test, and I use the Rogue Echo bike. I'm a big fan of those, simply because they're easy to use and they take a lot of abuse. We do one of our assessments is a max power test. We give them a good warm up, 3 to 5 minutes, and then we get them on the Echo bike, and we have them perform anywhere 10 to 12 max effort bike sprint tests. And that is to see how much power they can generate via wattage. And what that does is that gives me some ideas. If we are going to do sprint repeats at 85%, that will give me some ideas of some targets they need to hit. So very, very simple. If they can, at max effort, if they can hit sort of that 1,000-watt area, right? I know that my repeats are going to have to be around 850 for each repeat, right? Because I know that that's 85% of that, 100% number, right? Which is, in this case, we're using 1,000. So that's one of them. And then I also use a maximum aerobic speed assessment on the same thing on the bike. And I use the bike because, again, a lot of fighters are poor runners, so we're not going to use a treadmill. We're not going to use a rower, right? So the bike seems to be the best thing. And then what I do is I do their maximum aerobic speed test, and I just do a very, very simple 5-minute test, and I look at two numbers. One, how much ground did they cover within that 5-minute sort of 5-minute time zone? The really fit fighters will actually cover a little bit over 2 miles. That's what I've really found. And their average RPM is going to be right around the high 60 range, anywhere from 67 to about 72 RPM is their average sort of output. And then I take those two numbers, and that's how I actually determine where they're at. Now, most of my fighters, if they're pretty strong, can hit around that 1,000-watt number. But let's say that they're hitting around 500 or 600. Well, I know that they need more power. And that's something that we're going to work on through strength training. Obviously through just basic sled work, et cetera. But just getting them stronger is going to be huge. And then at the same time, let's say if they do their conditioning assessment, the maximum aerobic speed test, and they get somewhere in the 50s for their average sort of RPM, I know that, man, we need to really focus on developing their aerobic system. So those are two very, very simple assessments that we can use on the same piece of equipment. But again, what it does is it gives us simple, repeatable baselines, and that will give us information on, what those athletes need.
So something that I kind of took away from that is, and it was kind of my next question for you, is what are the marks that we see consistently in successful people in that, whatever that given endeavor, right? So fighters, we know that, we want to kind of, hit that 1,000, watt mark, or we want to hit that 2-mile mark, and to know that that's kind of that minimum that we want to have. And when we look at minimums, right, we talk about what they really do is they don't predict success, right? What we do is we look at what the most successful people do and what's kind of the common thread amongst them. And then we look at, all right, what's kind of the minimum of that population. And then when we evaluate you, we can't necessarily predict success off of those minimums, but we can predict failure, right? And so Gray talks about this with the movement screen, and to say that, it's kind of like an eye chart, right? And that if you want to be a fighter pilot and you go in and you take your eye test and you fail the eye test, you're almost definitely not going to be a great fighter pilot, right? Because it's predicted, that's going to be a huge predictor of failure for you. Whereas on the flip side of that, if I go in and I crush the eye test, it doesn't mean I'm going to be a great fighter pilot. It just means I've met the minimum to, as one of the boxes to check that that's a necessity to be that, right? So it's the same thing, is to say that, I'm not going to win, the next UFC card if I can go on the Echo bike over there and hit those numbers, right? It just means I at least get the token into the game, right? And that's really what we're looking for minimums, is to say what should you at least cover to get to the next mark, right? It's no different than if you're working your way up in the military or you're working your way up in belts and martial arts. Now, shifting gears a little bit, my post yesterday talked about, okay, well, what are some marks we look at in terms of recovery, right? And so, two big factors in recovery are sleep and nutrition. And, unfortunately, most people ask us, about how many minutes do I need in the cryo tank, or what's the best type of, massage gun? Whereas you got to check the big boxes first, sleep and nutrition. And then with nutrition, what's the first question you get every time? What supplements can I take? What can I take to, what's the best pre-workout? What's the best, mass builder? What's the best, fat loss, supplement I could take? And then the first thing I do with that is say, okay, before we even have that conversation, right? If there's even benefit to that at all, is you need to give me a food log. All right, you're going to track and write down everything you eat for the next 3 days, and I'm going to take a look at that. And when I take a look at that and I see that it's Wendy's and Doritos and Gatorade, then it's like if you go out and buy whatever it is at Vitamin Shop or GNC, you are literally peeing your money away. Right? And there's no other way to put it. You're peeing your money away, because a supplement's a good diet. It doesn't replace a bad one. So like I stole an analogy from Paul Chek, who I got to learn quite a ton from early in my career. As he says, the supplements are like golden nails, right? So we're going to build a house. Mike, you get the nails, I'll get the wood. Mike goes out, buys the top end, golden nails. They're the best nails you could buy. And then I go just get some crappy rotted out wood from that I found in the woods, and we're going to use that, right? Your golden nails aren't that special anymore. They're not going to do anything because I didn't have the foundation of having the right parts to put it into. So that's when you get the question, that's a minimum, before I even say, well, I think you could benefit from some creatine, because creatine is the most well-researched, most effective supplement probably out there, right? That everybody agrees on. But if it's Wendy's and Doritos and Gatorade, then you literally don't bother. Like, just send me a check for that money you were going to spend on the creatine, right? I could use it much better than you peeing it away. So like, that's one of our minimums from a recovery standpoint. Obviously you got a lot to deal with not only fighters, but like your group fitness people, like which is the other end of the spectrum. You're 35 to 55 type of thing. So in terms of lifestyle, coaching, that kind of stuff, do you have any certain minimums you try to look for with them when you're coaching?
Well, it's really tough, because when you're dealing with adults, and we've had this other conversation before, adults have a lot more going on in their lives than like a high school athlete does. A high school athlete it's kind of like Groundhog Day a little bit, right? They get up, usually mom and dad make a breakfast, send them off to school. Maybe they have a sport after, they do a little homework, and it's kind of rinse and repeat. Whereas as adults, we have a lot more going on, right? We've got work, we've got, the house, we've got other sort of endeavors in our life. We've got kids maybe. So, but one of the things that we always talk about is total stress. And the analogy that I use is, stress is just a bucket. And if the bucket is filled, and that bucket can be filled, by the way, with various types of stress. It could be emotional stress, it could be financial stress, it could be anxiety, it could be whatever, right? But if that bucket is filled and you're already stressed to the gills and your cortisol levels are through the roof and you're always anxious and you're always in this sympathetic scenario, I don't think going to the gym and working out and trying to murder yourself 6 days a week is the answer, right? So I sort of indirectly answered your question, but we need to understand what environment and sort of what each individual's day-to-day looks like before we decide, hey, what are we going to add on top of that? Because when we talk about in programming, it's not always about what you add. It's oftentimes about what you remove, right? And that's really what we have to really determine when we're working with individuals is, everyone's so excited about adding this cool exercise for the shoulder or doing this or doing this. It's like, well, maybe if you just removed a few things that were maybe the big rocks and the big triggers as to why things aren't going the way they should be, that might be the optimal standpoint. So there's so many things to look at when it comes to meeting the minimums, but it's really about finding out where that individual is currently and then creating a roadmap. And that's a big part of what we teach in the course, right? Is we ask all these questions that people don't even think about. You know, what is their day-to-day job? What is their stress level? What do their weekends look like? You know, what positions and postures do they spend the majority of their time in? What are their other stressors in life? I mean, you know, if someone walks through the door and all you do is just look at their mobility and then write a program, you're missing a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, and I think a key part of that when we talk about the art of programming is getting them engaged in that process. And that's where minimums are kind of a cool thing to use that to say, all right, you know, they come in and we give them, let's say I give them a recipe for some mobility because they have really poor shoulder mobility. They can't move their T-spine well at all because they sit in the desk all day. And say, here's 3 drills I want you to do every single day. It's going to take you about 10 minutes at most. But you got to do it every day. And the first thing that happens, they come in the door, we check their shoulder mobility. And we find that it hasn't improved. So guess what? Those 3 drills that I gave you to do at home, we're doing them now, yeah. Right? And each time they come in the door, if that needle's not moved, then we keep doing those drills. And look, if you're bored with this, you could fix this really easy. You could go do these at home, right? And if you do it at home, and as soon as you show up and show me good shoulder mobility, it's going to open up the window to a whole bunch more stuff that I want to do as well. I don't want to watch you do these same 3 drills over and over again, but there are certain minimums that you need to hit before you can, you know, get to the gateway of the next thing. And so from a programming standpoint, getting them to gauge and say, okay, I need your hands to get this far apart in your shoulder mobility, or I need you to at least be able to do this long on the hang, or I need you to be able to do this much on your floor press before we go into your bench press with a barbell. As soon as you can hit that mark, then we can go there, right? And I want to go there just as much as you do, but that's the mark. And then that way, it's not my ego, it's not, I don't like that, or all that is at a play. It's a matter of, here's the marks we got to hit, and let's work together to get there. And once you get there, we can move. Because I think the biggest thing with programming, and the more that I've kind of evolved and matured and made mistakes with it, is that getting people to understand, as the coach, the trainer, the therapist, even, you know, the clinician, is when you do this long enough, Mike, do you care what exercises your people do?
I could care less. I care about the
results. Yeah, I don't really give a shit what exercises I put in your program. I really don't. So I've done all of them so many times. Like, it doesn't matter to me whether you're doing an arm bar, whether you're doing an overhead press, whether you're doing a row, it doesn't matter. So I don't have any skin in the game here where I get a certain kickback with certain exercises versus other ones. So with that, right, I want to get you to whatever is going to get you there. And there are some things over on this side of this line that could really get us there faster. But you got to get past this line first. And that's really the whole concept of minimums, is to say, what are those things that you got to be able to do before you can go on to that next thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. And I think a lot of people, because they take various certifications, or, you know, maybe they've spent a certain amount of time, they think, well, we need to do this to do this. I mean, in the kettlebell world, we see it all the time. You know, people take their kettlebell certification, and then Monday morning, everybody gets swings and get-ups. And I get it. You're excited about it. But again, I really don't care. I really do not care what exercises that you use. And, you know, it's not like an affiliate program where every time someone does a kettlebell swing, I get a penny thrown in my bank account, right? It doesn't work that way. Like, I really don't care. But I will say this, there are certain exercises that are optimal based off of the adaptations that you're looking for with your clients. And then you can kind of decide, hey, like, is this better with a kettlebell, or is this better with a dumbbell, based off of, again, what you're trying to do. And then you always have to determine, you know, what are you good at coaching? You mentioned this earlier. What do you have access to? And, you know, how can you monitor progress? Because those are all just factors that people don't often think about. And at the end of the day, and it just does not matter. And what does matter is that you're doing well in your sport. And, you know, if you're a football player and you have all of the squat PRs and deadlift PRs in your in your, you know, collegiate program, but you suck at football, you're not doing your team any good, by the way. Yes, it's going to look cool on YouTube when everybody has the pump up video and you go out there and you crush the school deadlift, but you suck at football. Well, guess what? Cool. Maybe you should have just been a power lifter instead of playing football, because it doesn't really matter. And when we strip all these things away, I think we need to truly understand why we're doing these things in the first place, right? And that's just a big part of it. So, you know, I think in closing, Eric, I think the really the main point is systems matter. And again, hitting those minimums, checking off those very, very small boxes are just so important, because again, you can miss things. And when you have these minimums, these training minimums, you're going to write a program that's going to have more of a solid foundation. And then down the road, it almost gives you the opportunity to earn the right to do the fancy stuff.
Yeah, and to your point with the maxes, right? I have to deal with it all the time because I'm in that environment, and I've made the mistake of being the guy with the record board on the wall. And you know, I actually learned this from our friend John Tureen, is that, you know, he realized when he got into the Colts and he's like looking and he's looking at the record boards, he's like, none of those guys are our best players. And so there's not necessarily direct correlation. Now, strength is awesome. You know, before everybody comes at me at Twitter, say, well, strength is important. Yeah, it's important to a point. So there's a difference between minimum, maximum, and optimum. And so we can argue about the optimum, right? What is optimal for any situation? That's still up for debate. And I don't know if anybody can really give you a good, clear answer of what is exactly optimum. But we all kind of can agree on the minimums of this is what you at least should be able to do. And unfortunately, we jump right past that. And we want to see how much can you bench, how fast can you run, how high can you jump, how lean can you get, how long can you go. All these factors are base maximums. Whereas if we can at least check the boxes for your profile, what are the minimum things we need to see, is you will have a much more well-rounded, much more effective program, because it's the minimums that you're not hitting is what's usually holding you back, right? The kid who came in yesterday is an example, who I gave him nothing but basically stuff to improve his motor control and rotary stability. Him and his dad came in, he's like, his squats going through the roof, his bench press is going through the roof. And, you know, it's been a huge uptick since he started, you know, doing these things at home. And it wasn't because I did anything specifically for his squat or his bench press. All I did is get him out of his own way. I just found where he wasn't meeting the minimums and brought him up to that level. I didn't try to make him the rotary stability champion of the world, right? I just got him enough where that's not an inhibitor. That's not a governor. He can now hit all gears, right? So we kind of wrapping up this concept of minimums. Those are the things that get in your way. Those are the things that are the emergency brake on holding you from your performance. So a couple things we got to go through. One is this Friday Live we've been doing for a couple months now, right?
Yeah.
For a good while. We have a bunch of these backed up. One of our projects is we're going to be taking all these, which we have all of them recorded, that they are going to all get uploaded onto our YouTube channel, as well as be part of episodes you can watch of our newest project that we're working on, which is the Principles of Performance podcast. And so that's hopefully going to be together in the next few weeks. We're getting all that ironed out. We have some awesome topics we talked about yesterday. We're also lining up some pretty cool guests to have on there, which is going to be a bigger, better version of what we're doing here. Next week, we are not here. We got a holiday weekend, so everybody enjoy. And then obviously we have a bunch of other cool stuff coming up. Are we confirmed with what we did yesterday? Can we share that date?
Yeah, so we're 95% there, but I'm gonna have people mark their calendars anyway, because we should be good to go. September 24th, I believe, right? Is that what
Saturday? Yeah,
Saturday, September 24th. It's not official yet, but it should be within the next day or so. Monday at the latest. We're gonna have a course at Perform Better headquarters down in Providence, Rhode Island. So talk to our good friends over at Perform Better, and they're going to host us for a course in September. So we're really excited about that as well. You know, it's something that we've been wanting to do, and having the opportunity to work with that crew is going to be fantastic. So we're really excited about doing that. And once that information is solidified, we're going to have everything you need from links and all the information on our website, which is www.principlesofprogramdesign.com. In addition to that, I'll actually be speaking on this topic on program design at Perform Better in Chicago. So for those of you that are in that neck of the woods and you want to hear more about that, please let us know. And we do have some pretty cool an ebook coming out here that should be available within the next few weeks. Let's just say something that we're working on that is it's gonna absolutely change the game if you work with adult and specifically adult group training, because we're going to provide you with an invaluable resource. So we've got some few things coming up.
We also have the free preview course of the online course that you can take as well.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, so that's going to be pretty much it. Eric, anything else you want to cover before we call it a day?
We covered, as we always do, we covered quite a bit. So
Awesome.
Enjoy your weekend, folks. Thanks for joining us.
All right, guys, have a great weekend.